Shavua Tov, Parashat Beshalach, contains within it the magnificent episode of the splitting of the sea, the deliverance of the Israelites from their Egyptian pursuers, and the famous song at the sea. However, an incident that happens a few days after is highly significant. Coming off of the tremendous high of that sea-splitting episode, the Israelites are confronted with a very mundane problem at a place called Marah. They don't have water to drink. The waters that are there are bitter. So they complain to Moses, and God instructs Moses to take a certain tree which has certain properties to it, and use that tree to sweeten the waters. Moses does, and the people then drink. Problem solved. But the question is, why is this place so significant? And the rabbis give an answer. Because at this place, the Israelites were given 3 commandments in advance of the reception. Boy, I'm having trouble with my language tonight. In advance of the receiving of the balance of the commandments at Mount Sinai. Why 3 commandments given at Marah in advance? Perhaps this was done as a way of priming the well. I remember at my grandfather's house, he had an old well on his property, a hand well, which when I was a kid it worked. It's still there. It doesn't work anymore, but when I was a kid it worked. But to pump water out of that well, you had to prime it. You had to pour water in. Sort of like a preparation, and it would do... There's a reason for it, and it indeed made sense. And perhaps this was a spiritual priming of the well, give them some commandments, 3 in advance, so that they're ready to receive the balance of the Mount Sinai, perhaps. But the question is, what 3 commandments were there? And we will see that one of them is really out of place, but that one of them contains within it a very important lesson about life itself. The 3 commandments they were given were, number 1, the Sabbath. Number 2, civil laws. In other words, the ability for humanity to survive as a society. What happens about damages and litigation and all of that. And the third one is, surprise, surprise, the red cow. What is the red cow? Just to review, the red cow is the commandment of taking the ashes of a red heifer and using them to purify someone who had come into contact with a dead body. Okay. That seems a little bit esoteric. That seems a little bit out of place. I mean, the Sabbath, that's significant. And the laws of civil society is significant. What is the red heifer doing there? Why were these 3 things given at Marah, the place where the waters were sweetened by the tree that Moses was instructed to use? What is all of this about? It is about life itself. Because I believe that whenever we have this story of a physical thing, there is a spiritual story happening beneath the surface of it. So there was a physical thirst, so too a spiritual one. The physical thirst was quenched by a tree, and the spiritual one is also quenched by a tree. What tree? The tree of life. Eitz Chaim Hi, that's the Torah. The commandments that they were given, 3 commandments, quenched the spiritual thirst. But what was the spiritual thirst? It's a thirst that should affect all of us. And we need to quench it as we live our lives. Let's understand that a little deeper. But I will just bring us a little indication that the word, Vayorehu Hashem Eitz, God instructed Moses as to the tree that would sweeten the bitter waters. The word Vayorehu is the same root as the word Torah. So Torah is also a tree of life, and that can sweeten the spiritual waters and quench the spiritual thirst. Now, what is the spiritual thirst? I'm glad you asked. The answer is the meaning of life. You see, the Israelites found themselves in the desert at a place called Marah. This is not a place where one can be distracted by the pleasures of physical existence. There is no lust. There is no jealousy. There is no pursuit of honor in the desert. We discussed this a few weeks ago, that the rabbis in the Mishnah say that 3 things can cause a person to be taken out of eternal life: jealousy, lust, and the pursuit of honor. People can distract themselves a lifetime with these 3 things, and they ignore the more deeper questions of existence. And these 3 things are missing in the desert. There's nothing to be jealous of the desert, because the desert is abandoned property. It belongs to no one. It belongs to everyone. As far as lust goes, well, the desert is certainly not a place of lust. There's no luxury there to be had. And thirdly, the pursuit of glory, irrelevant to the desert. Nobody would build a palace in the desert, and if they did, nobody would see it. It wouldn't accomplish anything. So when life is stripped of all of its distractions, then we have to contemplate what is it all about in the first place. And I think that the 3 commandments that were given do relate to that question in particular, because that is the spiritual thirst that needed to be quenched. The Sabbath is relating to the reason for the creation of the world. We observe the Sabbath because God rested on the 7th day and he created the world in 6 days prior. In other words, we don't necessarily know God's answers, but we know that the fact that God created the world and put us in it means that there is meaning, there is importance, there is significance. That's the Sabbath. And as far as that's the before, what about the during? Well, then we have the laws of civil society, of treating each other human being with respect and living in harmony with each other. That's what we have to do. We have to be honest and decent citizens of the world. And the third part is the red cow, which relates to purifying someone who was in contact with a dead body. That's after all is said and done. And it is on that commandment that I wish to focus, because that commandment seems to be totally out of place. Second of all, it seems to be irrelevant at Marah. Why? Because the rabbis say that the red heifer was given as a commandment as a fix for the golden calf. The calf is the child of the heifer. The child that makes a mess, the parent, is the one that cleans up. So the golden calf brought about death, impurity, and the red heifer therefore comes and cleans it up. The problem is that at Marah, there had not yet been any golden calf. This had not happened yet. So was this an example of God giving the cure before the malady? Perhaps. Or perhaps it's much more significant, because the commandment of the red heifer is famous for its being a mystery. We explained when we learned this last year what the mystery really is. So I'd like to review. Because the red heifer seems to be a strange commandment, but it's not much stranger than many other commandments. And yet Rashi says in the parasha of Chukat, where it's given, that the nations of the world and the Satan being a synonym for the evil inclination, are mocking Israel because of this commandment. What is the reason for it, they say? What exactly does the Satan have to do with this discussion? Why are the nations of the world mocking us? And what exactly is so mysterious about the red heifer, the red cow? Indeed, the rabbis look for explanations, and they say that no less a wise person than King Solomon was puzzled by it to the point where he gave up. He raised his hands and said, Amarti echkama, I said I will become wise, and it is distant from me. I'm not able to comprehend it. Rabbis look for the element of the red heifer that is incomprehensible, but for each detail there seems to be a very nice, plausible explanation, whether it be a homiletical one or a practical one. Some rabbis say that the fact that the person who burns the red heifer to prepare it becomes impure. So if you're creating something that's going to purify people, how could it defile somebody else? It seems to be paradoxical. But that's also not so unusual. We have a similar rule when it comes to the priests preparing the animals in the temple for the sacrifices, that there is also a temporary impurity. So that's not unusual. I don't think there's anything about the ritual of the red heifer that does not have a very satisfying explanation. I don't believe that's the mystery. This may be a revolutionary idea, but I think that the mystery is not about the details of the red heifer, but rather the question of why bother with the red heifer? Why bother to become pure? And this is what the nations of the world and the Satan, the evil inclination, are saying. What are they saying? Life is meaningless. We all die at the end. There's only death. If that's what there is, we live and we die, then why bother to be pure? Instead, what should we do? Enjoy life. Many people believe that the purpose of life is to enjoy it. This is a terrible mistake. They are missing a way to quench a spiritual thirst. But they will say, pursue your jealousies, your lusts, your desire of honor, fill your life with things that distract you. Enjoy it, have a nice time, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That's what the nations of the world may say, and that is what the Satan, the evil inclination, will say. But King Solomon asked this question, and he comes to the conclusion that anything in this world that they would suggest as an alternative is worthless. Vanity of vanities, says King Solomon. He pursues every possible explanation for how one can fill one's life with this world's stuff. Perhaps it is joy, perhaps it is eating and drinking, perhaps it is philosophy and wisdom, perhaps it is hard work. In each of these he pokes a hole, and at the end he says, at the end, when all is said and done, Fear the Lord and keep his commandments. Ki zeh kol ha'adam, because that is the totality of man. That is the significance of the red cow. And I think that one can see a hint to this in the name, red cow. Red, aduma, comes from Edom, which is red. Edom is also the name of somebody in our book of Genesis. Esav, Jacob's brother, is called Edom because he was red when he was born. Now, what happened with Jacob and Esav? A very interesting incident. Jacob was preparing a lentil soup when they were young men. Esav came back from the field. He's tired. He wants some of the lentil soup, and Jacob says, "Sell me your birthright." The birthright was the guardianship of the future, if you will, and also the firstborn would have the responsibility of serving God in the temple, in the tabernacle. So Jacob wants to purchase Esav's birthright in order to give him the lentil soup. And Esav says something very significant. He says, "Behold, I am going to die. Of what use is my birthright?" In other words, he was saying exactly what the nations of the world and the Satan were saying. Life is meaningless. I don't care about being a guardian of the future or becoming pure and serving in the tabernacle. I just want the soup. I just want to live for today. I just want to live for now. I want to enjoy life. And that is what a lot of people say, but when they get stuck in the desert in a place called Marah, where there's only bitter waters, and all of those distractions are no longer there, after King Solomon has poked a hole in every possible philosophy that might use this world's stuff to create meaning, one is left with the existential question of, what are we here for? Sabbath, God created the world, put us here for a reason. Dinim, civil laws, we have to live in harmony with our fellow human beings. But Parah Aduma, the red cow, teaches us that there is significance. We need to strive for purity, to cleave to God, to observe his commandments. And then, when all is said and done, at the end, we will understand what it was really all about. Shavua Tov.